you, Michael. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Well, delighted to be here, and I always like to know who all's here. So, first of all, how many of you have been to Serenbe in the last 5 years? Okay, so most everyone. Well, those who didn't raise their hands, I need to see you right after my talk. You know, we want to find out why that is. Also curious, how many of you live south of I-20? Okay, so you're all my people then. And so I'm sure you understand when I say how frustrating it is sometimes when you're talking about the great things going on in the south side, and most people in Metro Atlanta think nothing happens south of I-20, right? You know, that everything's happening, all the excitement happens north. So when I had this idea, well, first of all, you know, I'll tell you why we ended up where we are in the very south part of the Fulton County area, and then the journey we had and how difficult it was when I was talking about what we were going to do and where we're going to do it. So I think, let me see how this starts. So this is really to give you some of the facts, and you see that $2 billion figure coming out. Someone who is coming in asked me if they could borrow some money. Now I want you to know, we're not talking about change out of my pocket or my bank account. This is what our investment has created on 80 acres. And that is everyone's purchases and what they've done and what we're doing with commercial. So that's where that $2 billion figure comes to. And so I'm going to give you the journey first about how we got started. So in the beginning, I was a hospitality guy, and I know some of you from when I had the peasant restaurants in Atlanta and we were opening them around the country, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, what have you. Living in Ansley Park, serving on various boards, and life seemed just perfect. We weren't looking for anything. And my daughters were 3, 5, and 7 in 1991. My wife saw in the back of the Georgia Preservation newsletter that there was a historic farm for sale just south of the airport. Now, being very urban people, we couldn't imagine that there was really open land south of the airport, so we wanted to see what they were calling a farm. And so I called and clarified that we weren't interested in buying anything, but if they had animals in the barnyard, we'd love to stop by and show our darling daughter's farm animals. And of course, anyone with anything for sale says, come on. We arrived, the Shetland pony was saddled, and we bought the farm. Now, I had no idea what we were going to do about it. I just knew that I was pleasing the 4 females in my life. And it was land that I figured that close to Atlanta, it was bound to, you know, be developed, so that would be a good investment. And we rented the historic 1905 farmhouse out. And there was a shack in the back that had been built in 1940 for farm laborers, and my wife said she would fix that in case we ever wanted to spend the night. You know, we envisioned that we would come out a couple Saturdays a month, go back to the city, you know, get the kids out, let them run wild, and head back to the city where we had the pool, the media room, the Barbie cars, you know, all the toys that money could buy. And to my amazement, the kids voted every weekend to come to the shack where there were no toys except a puzzle for rainy days. And we did that every weekend, every vacation. They could hardly wait to get out to the country. And that was my value shift. When I watched how free our kids were when I connected them back into nature, and it was great we were all crammed in this little shack versus the big house in the city. And so that was my value shift. And so in 1994, I sold the restaurant company. We had 34 restaurants in 8 states. I sold the big house, and we started restoring the historic farmhouse on the farm and moved the family there. And so life again seemed pretty perfect. I had been very successful in the restaurant industry. We were able to travel you know, for weeks at a time with the kids, and life was again just fine. And then one morning in end of 1999, my daughter and I were jogging along what was then the edge of our property line. I started by buying the original part of the farm, which was 60 acres. Then I put the 1905 farm back together. It had been divided in half, and then there was an extra little piece. So I had 300 acres when we were jogging along what was then the edge of our property. And to my amazement that morning, as we came over the hill, there was a bulldozer bulldozing the trees next to us. And I ran out and I stopped the guy and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "We've just been hired to clear the trees. I guess they're putting houses here. That's what always happens." Well, with panic, I ran back to the house to call the retired doctor who owned it. He lived over in Fayette County. I couldn't get him. And so I started calling other large landowners to see if they knew what was going on or if they'd had a developer trying to buy their land. And of course, I ended each conversation with, "If you ever decide to sell, give me a call." And so 5 weeks later, I had another 600 acres under contract. All sorts of reasons why people had to sell. Some had been in the families 2 and 3 generations. I finally got the retired doctor to answer, and he shared that he had sold it to someone down the road who wanted to put a little pasture airstrip in for his prop plane. So the immediate threat of housing in my backyard was over, but it was my wake-up call that yes, we were in the path of development, and it was time to do something about it. And I now had 900 acres, and what were we going to do with that? A dear friend was Ray Anderson. Well, I'm sorry, so I knew urban sprawl was headed our way, and I certainly didn't want this to happen to what we'd found as the rural paradise. A good friend was Ray Anderson. If any of you are the environmentalists, Ray formed Interface Carpet. When the White House in the 90s formed the Council on the Environment, he was the first chair. And so we were having dinner with Ray and his wife one night, and I said, "Ray, what am I going to do? You know all the smart people. Who can come out here and help us figure out how to keep this from turning into urban sprawl, but yet protect the value?" And so Ray asked the Rocky Mountain Institute to help. And in September of 2000, they assembled 23 thought leaders for 2 days. Georgia Tech documented that they were all impressed. These were some of the real voices of the environmental movement. We forget how far that's come. 20 years ago, there were just a few voices screaming the concerns. But it was sort of a scattered, we didn't know what to do. I think today, while there's still a lot of work, we pretty well know what we need to do in that movement. But back then it wasn't. Put things in perspective, in September of 2000, the first LEED building had not been certified. The program hadn't even been rolled out yet. So that's where we were in that entire movement. We proceeded to figure out what we could do to keep this wonderful rural character and at the same time maintain values, in fact increase values. It was the only way we were going to get the preservationist and the development, because they were divided in property owners. There were some of each. It was the same groups of people that you see at every zoning battle that we've all dealt with and watched fight. And we found that the inherited landowners were the worst because they'd grown up together and they had no problems calling each other names across the room. And so it was quite a task. So for 2 years, we brought those two groups together. And today, when you hear the numbers, the Chattahoochee Hill Country is 65,000 acres. That's 4 counties. We are the first development under these new regulations that were placed in an initial overlay in 2002. To give you an idea of the size of that, that is half the size of the inside of the perimeter of Atlanta. Half the size of the inside of the perimeter of Atlanta. And we're the first development under these new regulations. Now, 65,000 acres of the Chattahoochee Hill Country, a 4-county alliance. The city of Chat Hills, we were granted cityhood in 2007. And that is mostly in Fulton, but Coweta County is the city. And then Serenbe, we own 1,200 acres. And to date, we have only disturbed 80 acres and permanently preserved the 70%. Now, this is really meaningful for several reasons. Now, this next slide shows you that we determined if we allowed the area to be rezoned 100 acres, 500 acres, as developers want to do it, like we've seen on all the counties around Metro Atlanta for the last several decades, we would end up just using the same formula, the same math that's happened. We would disturb over 80% of the land for 30,000 houses. So our task as we brought folks together to look at master planning, it was how could we put at least 30,000 houses on the property, and how much land could we save while we were doing it. So we turned all of our landowners into planners, and it's a whole story to tell about how that happened. But what we've come up with is we will be able to put 20% more housing per square mile than Atlanta has done in the last 3 decades, and we will save 70% of the land. So this is a win-win for the preservationists and for the developers. Now here's the other key, is infrastructure is 40% to install and maintain in this clustered model versus the sprawl. So it makes sense for everybody. And so with the rules in place, we proceeded to start with Serenbe. Serenbe is now recognized as one of the models in the United States and nationally, internationally, of being able to save 70% of the land while we're developing 30%. Now everybody thought I was absolutely nuts. Some of my Atlanta friends came out to the woods. They were sure I was growing marijuana in the woods, because how was I absolutely this crazy that I thought I could do a village out here? You know, and they said, well, if you're going to develop, you know, maybe these little farmhouses out here and, you know, sell people 10 acres. And no, I'm going to put live works. You know what live works are, with the shop downstairs and the residents upstairs, and we're going to put a restaurant right out here in the woods. You have lost your mind, man. You know, if you're going to put a restaurant in, at least put it on the main street, not in the middle of the woods. How's anybody going to find you? Well, somehow in this period from the time when the Rocky Mountain Institute was there, and I was looking for somebody to help me save my backyard, and Ray Anderson pushed me to meet other people around the country to go visit. And I started understanding how serious the issues were with our built environment. And if you looked at how we used to develop 100 years ago, where I traveled in Europe, it just didn't seem that hard. I couldn't understand why we weren't doing more responsible development. And somewhere along that line, Ray pushed me through that threshold of passion. And so it became a point that even though everyone said I was crazy, everyone said we couldn't do it, it became something that I felt we had to do, that it was really important. It was more than just saving our backyard, and it was just that incredible feeling. And it seemed an impossible task. I mean, when I was in the hospitality business, I served on a lot of great boards. We tried to do a lot of things. I had a restaurant 7 blocks from the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. during the restoration of the Pennsylvania Development Authority on Pennsylvania Avenue in the 80s. I had a great Rolodex, and you could get very little done. So I was not in some fantasy that we were going to really change things, but yet there was a real passion that we just had to do this to save the backyard. And so you can come to Serenbe now, and you will see we're that mix of rural and urban. Our best model is 80 years ago. This is the way towns, anybody that grew up in rural, you'll see that is what happened. Serenbe, we have 4 key areas that we look at: arts, agriculture, health, and education. So in addition to clustering together and connecting to nature, 2 key things now the studies are coming out about health and mental illness, or mental health, is connecting to one another and connecting to nature are 2 of the key things. And yet we've been building places for the last several decades that remove us from both. So we connect people to people, we connect people to nature, and then we bring art, food, education, and we end up with wellness. So those are the 4 components. We also understand, because we were at the beginning of the real movement for environment. So the Blue-Eyed Daisy, if you've been there, it remains the smallest silver LEED certified building ever certified. Generally a building that small, you don't do it. We were the test community for Earthcraft, and every house and every building now has to be certified by one of those 2 or another certified program that shows that everything's environmental. That's a responsible Overall, we have reduced demand by 35% on all of our buildings, and now geothermal is mandatory, and that will take us to about 65–70% that we're reducing demand. Next challenge is to make everything solar, and we'll be a net zero place. So we're really environmental. It's water conservation as well. A lot of things come into really conserving to really truly be sustainable. All of our other programs are sustainable, whether you're talking about arts, farms, well-being, businesses. It's economically sustainable and sustainable in watching our energy sources. This gives you the 5 phases. As I say, that map is about 500 acres. That shows you Selborne, which is in the lighter blue color, and that's with the focus on the arts. You have then down here in the red is the farms, and those are all the farm side, and that's a real focus on agriculture. The general store, the blacksmith shop, and all are there. Then over to your left with the yellow ring is Motto, and that's focused on health that we're building out right now. And then down below that is an extension of that, phase 4. On the Coweta side, we'll be doing 300 Victorian cottages around a park. There's a real focus on play there. And then we're doing an education campus over there on the purple. So we've got a lot of great things to do. We're probably 20% when you consider what all is there. We do have major locations for 3 to 5 million square feet of office space. So this is a true, total mixed-use, multi-generational community. Selborne was the first to cut ground, and that's with a focus on the arts. And one of my favorite slides there is the upper left-hand side. That's my townhouse that the girls were all headed to college by the time we were doing this, and we didn't need the big farmhouse. So we built that townhouse. Now, about 3 years ago, maybe 4, the Urban Land Institute, the granddaddy of developers, invited me to their conference in Dallas that year. And my topic was, what is the premium cost to a developer to do an environmental community? And so, of course, my whole presentation was the savings. And I had a slide. You can see my balcony right up there and the stone house. And one morning I had stepped out on that balcony, and we have a market just down, and there was a family with a group of kids that were coming from the market. And all those grasses, that's all seen, natural weeds and grasses and wildflowers blooming. And the wildflowers that spring were just beautiful, and they were all, and this family had posed at the edge of the market to get all those wildflowers in the background. And then about midway through, there was this young couple in love, and they had stopped. They were getting a selfie posing, so they had all the wildflowers. And then up at the Blue-Eyed Daisy, there was a group of the Red Hats, you know, the ladies in the purple and the red. They had all come out, and there was a group of 10 or 12 on the edge up by my townhouse getting a picture with the blue-eye, with all the flowers behind it. They had somebody taking their picture. And so I, from my balcony, was able to take a picture of all those. And I showed all the developers, and I said, now, you know, I know how much money you all spend for those fancy clipped entrances and all those fancy fairways. Now, here's my patch of weeds. Now, how many of you can get this much appreciation in all of your clipped landscapes? People are hungry for authentic places. And a group of weeds with wildflowers gives you that. Ryan Gainey, a dear friend who had done all this, he wrote the book, The Well-Placed Weed. And I think that's it. We've sanitized our life so much that we've lost a lot of the vitality in it. And Serenbe represents that and connects with the authenticity that we have in many ways. Our arts, we understand how important arts is to our soul. And so we commission artists to do our street lights, our trash cans, our benches. We employ craftsmen to do the work. And we don't only want to give support to it, but we created the Serenbe Institute for Art and Environment, and there's a 1% transfer fee for every time any house is sold and resold. And so we are able to support the arts, and we have some of the most outstanding arts. How many of you have been to a theater production? Okay, now you know, do yourselves a favor, get season tickets because it is nationally known for the arts, and we're opening with Shenandoah here just in a couple weeks. So come on out, doing hair, lots of great things. So we have the galleries, art galleries, culinary events. Go to our webpage. We have a full calendar. You can do something almost every night at Serenbe. There are 3 events going on right now tonight alone from culinary and arts. But to show you what a leader we are, last week, Fast Company named the Playhouse one of the world's most innovative companies. Now, isn't that amazing? All that happening just south of you. One of the world's, not nations, world's most innovative companies. And if you come to one of the theaters, you'll understand. For Miss Saigon, they landed helicopters. The things that go on for the various things, it's just incredible. We sank a ship for Titanic, and so it's pretty exciting. Then Grange is where the farm is, 25 acres of farm. We have CSA, the general store. And if you hear about agri-hoods, Serenbe is the beginning. It was a New York reporter doing a story on people now starting to put farms near residential, this close in. We were the first to actually bring a farm right up to people's backyards. Some places that had farms, but they're off in a corner because everybody thought that farms were smelly and you didn't want to live next to them. And several people thought it was absolutely nuts that we were going to put a farm right in somebody's backyard. We did, and now that's called the Agri-hood movement, which is a huge movement now. In fact, the Urban Land Institute is going to start doing classes at Serenbe for developers on how to do it. This is a community of food. Now this is the whole community. And to bring the farms into the community, at the crosswalks are blueberry bushes. Our kids know that when the service berries come, the next thing's going to be the blueberries, and then the figs, and then the apples and the pears, and then the nuts. And just, it's because it's at the crosswalks, it's in the community. And now this is news. We're just getting ready. Well, that's a 25-acre organic farm. But the big news that we're about to bring about is the Rodale Institute, which was really the beginning of organic research, even before it was called organic, from Pennsylvania in the 30s. And they're going to be opening their Southeastern Research Center on the eastern edge of Serenbe. And so this is going to big news, big economic, big research. So here again, we're not only the arts, but now food and sustainable food. Farms are a foundation of well-being. This is a new report that's just out on that wellness is the new trend in real estate, and this is the big thing. So if you're in the real estate industry, get on board, because people are going to start looking at this. Look, at 20 years ago, no one thought we would have a certified building, and now every Fortune 500 company, anybody that's worried about resale is going to have a certified building. I mean, there's not many gray hairs here, but a few. We could never imagine that we were going to live in a smoke-free society, that no one would be smoking, right? So this is going to change, and we're going to be more concerned about the kind of places we build, because it affects wellness. And so we're building an entire community about well-being. And next month we're opening the first office building in the Chattahoochee Hills with a focus on wellness providers. Not necessarily people that are going to fix your sickness, but people that are going to keep you well from becoming sick, and that's where the real focus needs to be. Let's stay vitally well at all ages until it's time to die, and then let's die with grace. I can't figure out why we're so afraid of that. And so Motto is really exciting. We're in the middle of doing this. All sorts of health programs, and you see people walking challenges, cycling, and there's health reports coming out of every household. And the Global Wellness Summit contacted us, and in Marrakesh 5 years ago, we presented Serenbe as one of the global examples of how the built environment starts affecting your health. They've now been tracking us for these 5 years. we have been on a conference call with global leaders regarding this very subject. And did anybody see the time that hit the stands last week? Go out and get it. It's on wellness. It's up there in the left-hand corner. It's going to be on the stand several months. This is one of their special issues that stays on the stand for several months. And they have 5 pages talking about Serenbe. Your neighbor, just down the road, we're in Time magazine right now, 5 pages. So these crazy ideas that you don't think you're going to change, and you're just going to save your own backyard, and now we found we are really changing things around the world. This is the Global Wellness Summit. We're just at their conference in Italy, and they again continue to highlight Serenbe as one of the world leaders. We're headed to Hong Kong with them this fall, and so we are on the national stage in wellness, in agriculture, in arts, and yet there are a lot of people in Buckhead who don't know who we are or haven't been out there. I think the South Side is where it's going to happen in the future. We're demonstrating that's the case. And so all of you who do live south of I-20, who have your businesses in I-20, I think you're in the future of what's going to happen to Metro Atlanta, because we just have to make sure we don't mess it up like the rest of the Metro Atlanta. And it's going to be a lot more economical to build the new future things in the open spaces that we haven't messed up than to fix the problems that we've had. We're developing jobs, and jobs in all segments that you have. Our new building is getting ready to open. There will be over 75 people working in there. We still have positions open. We still have spaces open. And next to that are 15 live works. You can see, that not in that page. Live works are where your retail's down below and you have the apartments up. We have 15 of those. I think half are sold. There's still 6 more that you all can come out and check. And a lot of it's great investment. Things are appreciating greatly for people that are doing resales. We've had people move within the community. You have one woman who's on her 7th property within the community, and she makes good money every time. She says, and she's not a speculator, and she really isn't. This is going to be the perfect place, and then she does such a great job. Somebody offers her great money for it. Well, I guess so. And off she goes, So she's having a great time. So this is, it gives you an idea. We're going to be doing a lot more. We have hotels on the drawing boards. Again, I'm struggling to get the bankers to believe that we can do all this out there. So it's constantly a struggle. South of I-20, people, the bankers don't even know where it is. And it's been this way all the way through. Of course, I'm used to that because in the 70s, I opened my first restaurant in Midtown because that was all I could afford. Now, that was when there were still houses of prostitution in the storefronts, and the hippies having left. Then things were all boarded up. Midtown was not a very cool place to be in the 70s, I can tell you. But I realized it was the only place in town that had a grid. And then the MARTA plans. And so I was there for the opening of the MARTA stations in Midtown. And I bought land in Midtown because I believed in it. And became head of the alliance. Set leadership in for the board. Susan Mendham, who I put as the executive director, was there for 25 years. And in the 80s, we changed the zoning code for the large area to be a walkable community. In the 80s, when we had to fight with DOT to take lanes out of the highways because the interest was to get everyone from Buckhead to downtown because that's where all the offices were. That's where the banks and lawyers and all were. No one really cared about Midtown, they just wanted to move through it. Today, because of those zoning regulations, guess where all the bankers and lawyers are? It's Midtown. The highest values are in Midtown. And so I've gradually sold Midtown. I had to sell one of my last properties on Midtown to build the office building because all the banks thought I was crazy. That no one would come out here in the woods south of Atlanta to rent office space. Well, as we get ready to cut the ribbon, we're at 80% leased, and we haven't even opened yet. So, Serenbe is a model for anything on the south side. Bring your financial people, bring the disbelievers out, and you'll see what's happening. Now those little girls I told you about, they grew up. Now here's the thing I never expected. They went off to schools, Cornell, University of Colorado in Boulder, 2 of them. But now they've all returned to Serenbe with their northern husbands, and my grandchildren are being raised on the streets of Serenbe. So, you know, I many times think my best model in how we were going to build a community was looking at yesteryear, where we lived closer and more huddled or on farms. And now I realize that my family is modeling how we also lived those many years ago, when you understood the support system of having family together, and grandparents were there with their grandchildren on a daily basis. And so that's one of the greatest rewards that I have. I love David Orr's quote here, that it makes far better sense to reshape ourselves to fit a finite planet than to attempt to reshape the planet to fit our infinite needs. And boy, isn't that what we've been doing the last several decades? We have just been imposing ourselves on nature, and I guess it hasn't worked out too well. Antidepressants have increased fourfold each decade for the last 2 decades. We are sicker, spending more money on health than we ever have, and something's got to change. And I believe Serenbe is a good example of how it can change, and it's not a sacrifice. In fact, it's such a reward and fills people that are living there and people that visit. Now, we tried to figure out how to share this with other people. And we're planning now the 3rd Biophilic Conference that will be coming up in April. And this is really geared towards educators and policymakers. We do this in partnership with Tim Beatley at the University of Virginia. And we've looked at what Serenbe is. Some folks have said, you know, we're a new urbanist, or we're agri-hoods, or we're a health community, all these things. So when I started having to speak to people about who are we, I realized we weren't any one of those things, while all those things were there. And I realized we were a biophilic model for development. Biophilia is the love of all living systems, and that's what it should be all about when we develop places for people to live and play and work. And so we're now sharing the biophilic model with policymakers and educators from around the country, and it's amazing who comes. City planners, MIT, Harvard, Yale, we're getting really incredible folks coming to that. We're also this fall, we'll be doing our 5th, maybe 6th Nygren Placemaking Conference. This is geared towards developers, and while the Biophilic Conference is more of a think tank, this is a place where we share with developers how we did this, and we bring everyone in. The planners and the people that were in regulation at Fulton County, and then we bring a few bankers, some that tell how they laughed at us, and others now that quit and are down there helping build houses with us, and we bring in people from the community and talk about community engagement and our architects and environment. And so we really try to get in a 2.5-day, 5 segments where we really focus on a more responsible way to develop. So these are on our webpage, and I think Denise has some cards out front that you can learn more about what we're doing. And then, of course, there's the Inn at Serenbe. So the Inn at Serenbe is a great place to come, bring conferences. We have conference rooms. Being close to the airport, we have a lot of national and international conferences, and the very local kind of conferences too. Or for you, it's a great time. You can come for a meal at one of our 4, soon-to-be 5 restaurants, stay at the inn, spend a night, or you might decide to stay a lifetime with us. And so we give all those opportunities. So I think that gives you a bit of an idea of what we're doing at Serenbe, and if you haven't been there in the last year, you'll be surprised with what's happening out here in the woods just south of you. So, thank you much, Michael, for inviting me.
Anyone have any questions for Steve about Serenbe? Please.
I just heard today that the President's appointment of the new person in charge of the environmental protection Bureau?
Yeah,
EPA, right. Who is a former coal industry lobbyist, was just approved by the Senate today. So I'm just curious your thoughts on where we're headed and the sustainability of the environmental movement in light of recent and current political climate in the country?
Well, you know, it's this is certainly a global issue, and I think it's hard to deny what's happening, and why we can really be discouraged when we hear things like today. I was at a breakfast with Al Gore here about a year ago, and of course that's one of the really doomsday voices that's been there for the last 2 decades, and globally he had all the text, and he says, for the first time I have hope, because globally this is changing a lot, and political people come and go. We hope they don't do too much damage, but many times it forces the needle to go the other way. You know, I think it's a lot of times the terminology, or we should all be concerned. Don't we all want clean water for our children and fresh air, no matter if you're a Republican or Democrat? And that's what we need to talk about. Global warming and environment seems to be a lightning rod. And so I think those that are concerned, we have to change the conversation. But I think it's just undisputable of what's happening, and I think things will change, and I think those of us that are concerned, we've got to come out and vote. The people that are in office, if you don't agree with them, it's only our fault that they're in those offices. And those that are doing things that are possibly going to be harmful, hopefully the good news is that's going to wake up a greater electorate, and I think we're starting to see that. And that's what I hope is the positive thing that comes out of that. You know, it can get really discouraging if you deal with what's happening today, but this planet is resilient. You know, I think one of the biggest restarts for me and anyone is if you just take a walk in nature. Spend another 10, 15 minutes in nature every day, and you realize this is all much bigger than we are. And it's going to take care of itself one way or the other. I hope it's the more gentle way that we were responsible, but I'm sure of it. Yes?
Hi, Patricia Lovett. I live here in East Point, but by birth I'm a country girl. I certainly have enjoyed Serenbe from inception to, throughout the time that I've been here. And I love the idea of planting and growing and eating and health and all of that good stuff. On a simpler side, and you have the food growing next to the housing, how do you keep the animals out?
Well, we share.
We don't keep them out, we share them.
You share. You know?
Okay.
Plant enough for all of us. And then there are certain plants that are prohibitors. So there's, you have to learn, depending on what animal you consider your pest, there's certain things they don't like. Whether it's the deer, put lots of rosemary in. Yeah. And then, deer's a good example of these cute little things. People do not want to control Bambis, but after a while you have to. And so we're having an active culling now. We've gotten the community to understand the importance of culling, that for the entire environment there has to be balance. And the deer have gotten out of hand and too many. Because we are afraid of having wolves in our landscape, and let alone we're scared of having coyotes. So you have to have a balanced landscape. I often think if you come to Serenbe, you can go down to the streams on a hot day, and people come back, man, what do you do to control mosquitoes? I want to buy some of that. Do you know what we do to control mosquitoes? We leave the environmental system alone. We have all these awful pests because, we go to one of these stores and we buy a bag of stuff to take home so your plant grows faster. You know, and then we have this green stuff. I have never understood it, that you have to chemicalize to make it pretty, and you have to go cut it every week, and there's the noise of it cutting, and then all those chemicals get in the air and blow in your house. You know, it used to drive me crazy in Ansley Park when I came home, and there was a sign twice a year on the neighbor's yard, "Don't walk on the grass for 24 hours." My cat could never read, right across the grass, up in the couch in the house, you know. And why is it going to go away in 24 hours? So, you know, we start putting all these things that kill the natural predators, and then we got these bugs biting us, and so then we get more sprays, and pretty soon we're living in a chemical waste dump, and we want to know why we have asthma and cancer? I mean, you can't keep doing this and expect a different result. So, nature knows how to thrive. We just need to leave it alone and respect it and not asphalt it over. As you can see, I can become a preacher real fast. I can get on my soapbox, you know.
Thank you. What does Serenbe need, and what's the population?
Thanks. Those are both great questions. When we started coming out to the country every weekend, as I told you, we found that when we slowed down to simply be, we found the serenity we had been searching for. And so we named it Serenbe. We have about 700 people living in Serenbe now, with someone new moving in about every week. About 200 kids. National average, those 200 kids, we should have 15, 16 with asthma. 3 so serious they had to visit an emergency room. None. It's getting beyond the fact and statistics that it's not a bunch of my kooky friends. This is bigger. People are moving out from Atlanta that has respiratory problems, older people. We're a demonstration that it does make a difference. And we can do simple things. No matter where you live, you can do simple things to start changing it.
My name is Marissa Miller, and my husband and I actually own a 4.5-acre micro farm in the Chat Hills area of South Fulton.
Yes.
So when we first moved out there, of course, one of our very first family trips was out to Serenbe. So we love it.
Thank you.
We love it. My question to you is around education. You just mentioned about the families with little people. We are very fortunate to have 2, a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. So can you talk a little bit about the Montessori school that's on site, as well as Serenbe's relationship to the Chattahoochee Hills Charter School, and just kind of what the education landscape looks like?
So education's a huge thing, and we have a lot of plans to do a lot more. But on property, we have a Montessori school that's now Acton Academy. Acton Academy is a program that we have bought a license for, and I'm not the person that can tell you best, but what I see is it's believing that our kids need to be exposed to many people in many disciplines, and it isn't always a college-educated, degreed person in education that is the best. And so it's to bring a lot of people in. The key is the test scores, and to get these young people really excited about what's going on. So we have them in 2 storefronts in Grange now, and there's a campaign, we're building a new campus in Motto, to where they'll be able to have animal pens right there. And so it's really going to be great. Now that's still a private school. Because we've been very, very active in scholarship programs, and they're doing great scholarships, so we're making sure that we have a good balance of folks that can come there, some that can't participate in those private schools. The community as a whole, we felt that education was a huge thing, and so we moved forward to create a charter school. And that came through the leadership of Serenbe, the funding came from Serenbe, and we built this under the principles of Richard Louv. You know about Richard Louv? He wrote the book 11 years ago, Last Child in the Woods. When the book came out, I sent Rich a note and said, thank you, because you've given voice to what we intuitively knew 10 years earlier when we moved our family out there, and become great friends with Rich. And so we built the school under his principles, and so there are no halls. There are cottages in the middle of the woods, and all the students, part of your uniforms, you have to have climate-friendly weather or uniform, because you have to spend 1/3 of every day, no matter what the climate is, outside. Now here's the great news, and if you want to learn more about it, one of the greatest things is go to YouTube, look for CBS Sunday Morning, Chattahoochee Hills Charter School. CBS flew Richard Louv to the campus to interview him. Have you seen that interview? Why was CBS interested? I mean, there's charter schools that open. In our second year, we had the greatest test score. Now, a lot of these kids came from Palmetto, from Fairburn. In Palmetto, 96% of the kids are on free or assisted lunch. That gives you an idea of where they're coming from. So the basis maybe was lower. But we had the highest improvement in test scores at the end of our second year than any school in metropolitan Atlanta. But that isn't why they came and wanted to talk to us. Guess what it was? Do you know how many days the average kids in Metro Atlanta miss due to illness? 13. The state's even higher. And this is a national issue. Kids are not going to school because they're legitimately sick. Our absentee rate is so low that it rounds out to 0, and they wanted to know how we were doing that. We hired the school nurse from Palmetto Elementary, and she says, I saw those same kids 3 years ago, and they were legitimately sick. And I'm sure they have the same parents, most of them living in the same house, and they're not sick. What was happening? They were spending the majority of the day outside. They weren't going in halls. They weren't handling chair rails. And their mental attitude was different. And now studies are coming out that what you expose yourself to, whether it's nature or beauty, changes our mental attitude. You know, the American Medical Association saw these researchers several years ago, and that's why all hospitals now are putting big windows in. And you can put them in, you know, the new lead hospital in Noonan, Piedmont Hospital. It's big windows overlooking a future garden. Documented facts that what we see, and now there's more reports on beauty, changes our mental attitude. And our mental attitude actually changes some of the prime diseases. This isn't just sort of, and the documents are coming out. So what we see, how we think, is affecting our, and these kids are healthy. That's one of the best examples of how this affects, no matter where you live or where you are on the economical scale. It's all there. So we're doing a lot there. We want to. Now the problem is there's 500 kids there with a long wait list. Most kids at Serenbe can't get in because there's such a wait list, and it comes from all over. We plan to do a lot more with education. We're talking now about an international boarding school, an international school with a boarding component where kids could come from all over. So we believe in education from the time, you know, parents have conceived until we death. You know, at the other end, we need to teach our population how to die. We're bringing in a death doula. We have a community care group that comes around people. We have 2 people who have died at Serenbe and they've never left. The communities come around to support the caregiver and the spouse. So no matter what your age, where you are in this spectrum, there's something to learn at every age.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Come see us.
Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you.